Good morning. Welcome to the Die Hard session. There's few of us, but we're loyal, right? Power to Apple. Our speaker this morning is Jay Beale, who probably doesn't need an introduction, but it's appropriate to say a few words about him. You may know him from his work with Bastille Linux, and also as the author of the Internet Center for Security Unix audit tool, and you can hold up your book.
I will hold up the book.
Co-author of the Singress Snort book, in which he wrote a seminal preprocessor section documenting a lot of the things that are heretofore undocumented. That's a reason to pick up that book. So without further ado, here's Jay.
Make sure we don't get picked up on both. Hello. Okay, so basically, I like to do lockdown. I like to do a lot of things, but I like to do lockdown a lot, and they got this new OS X thing out, and I know it's not that new, but it's new enough for me, right? And I said, gee, it would be plenty fun to see how you'd lock that down, and to see quite how bad it is before you lock it down. And so I got myself a shiny Apple and checked it out. So I'll basically be showing you today what I found and how you can lock down your own Apple if you've got one, or somebody else's Apple if you hack into one, or, I mean, I didn't say that word, Black Hat, this isn't DEF CON, no. So what do we do? First, we'll talk about auditing the core operating system, choosing tighter settings than Apple has chosen for us, and then I'll talk a little bit about automating the process with Bastille. I actually got Bastille Linux ported to OS X, I think about 3 months ago, and it's in its early stages on the platform, but it does work and it does do a lot of what we're going to do today. Okay, so how much lockdown can you talk about in an hour? And you say, wait, can't you talk about all of it? Well, honestly, if you look at the program guide, I do a 2-day, 14-hour course on lockdown. So, and that's Linux and Solaris. Locking down any operating system takes a whole bunch of time. There's tons of stuff we can do. What I want to do is show you how to make your laptop, if you brought one, safe enough, I would say, to bring it into DEF CON this weekend. Okay? Well, there are people there with screwdrivers. There are people there, well, okay, nearly safe enough for DEF CON. Okay? So we'll talk about we'll do a boot security audit. Okay, what's boot security? That means we'll try to make it so somebody who knows key commands, who knows a few key commands, and has a boot CD-ROM, doesn't happen to root your laptop while you're running off to the bathroom or whatever. We'll do a daemon audit. We'll look at the daemons that are on the system. We'll look at the network daemons that are on the system. We'll shut some down. I'll show you how to shut things down that Apple didn't really intend for you to shut down, just a little bit. After that, what you would do, and we'll get into a little bit, is a set UID audit. You look at the programs on the system that allow normal users to be root. Okay. We'll look at cron jobs. We'll look at the you look at the programs that are running on the system, and you just want to know what runs on this system in order to tighten it down. And then where you would go next would be configuring daemons for better security. Okay. OS X is a crazy little operating system, or at least that's what it feels like to me, because I've seen Apples before, right? You look at Apples and they got this nice little GUI interface, and everyone's always said you can't hack an Apple, right? You're not going to hack an Apple remotely, you know, because they don't really have any certain, you know, they don't really have a remote administration interface. So what are you going to get it to do, you know? And yes, you could find ways to hack OS 9 remotely, but yeah, there wasn't a whole lot you could get the thing to do. So now what are they doing? Now you've got an operating system that runs Office. Okay, it's still got this wonderful easy to use GUI that means I'll give an Apple to my grandmother. Okay, actually my grandmother's a kernel programmer. So you know, but at the same time you've got Unix underneath, and more than you having Unix, you kind of have what feels like a bunch of things that have been stuck together. Right? You've got kind of a free BSD. You've got a free BSD architecture all over there. You've got a mock kernel, okay, and then you've got some weird next stuff thrown in just because well, Steve Jobs was coming from Next and thought that maybe he'd bring some guys with him and they'd need something to do, so, right. Okay, so the first place we'll work on, first thing we'll look at is boot security, okay? The whole boot process, it's not entirely simple because mock is this weird kind of kernel, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens before where we normally start, where we normally think of, we normally think on a Unix system, you'll have the kernel start, a bootloader will load the kernel will load init, and that'll be it, it'll just be that. And mock's a little bit more complicated than that. For our purposes today, let's assume that there's a bootloader, okay? Let's assume that there's a bootloader, open boot, that loads a kernel, okay? Let's assume the kernel loads, that the kernel's first process is called mock init, and not really worry too much about what mock init does, except that it starts init, which is really what we thought the first thing that would start would be, okay? And init still ends up being process 1. And then it's going to run 2 scripts, rc.boot, okay? And it's going to run rc. And rc.boot, one of the primary things that's there for is single user mode. So we're going to look at that, okay? And then what's rc do? Well, we're used to rc, loading lots of things by itself, okay, or loading another RC script on most BSD operating systems. Or if you're used to sys5, like Linux and Solaris, then you're used to RC going and running a whole bunch of stuff out of, say, etc rc3.d. It goes through and runs every single start script it finds in a given directory. And the way it does that, it runs them all in order. Okay. What this does on the Mac is it's running a program called System Starter. And System Starter is kind of, we're going to come back to that, and I'll show you, System Starter is kind of strange. Okay. So first, let's get into what could somebody do at DEF CON to our laptop, right? Very first thing they're going to do. Has my laptop turned itself off? Yes, it has. No, it's just gone to sleep. Okay. The very first thing they're going to do is they're going to shut down our system, and that box there, as you'll see if you look in your book, that box is a little open apple character. It just didn't render properly in PowerPoint. Yeah. Okay, so what you do is you just hold down open apple S during the boot, and what we can see is, let me shut this system down, you can see, okay. So I'm holding down Open Apple S behind the podium. Over there. Do you guys see an apple in the middle of the screen, or is it just white? It's just white, but it's not blue. Blue is nothing. Okay, still waiting. Maybe it's not happy with our projector. My screen, this is the strange thing. My screen shows an open apple and a little guy wiggling and wiggling around like it does during a normal boot, which is what's strange. Yeah, I'm going through a normal boot. This is not what I should be doing. Yes, it's more secure. See, they didn't get single user mode or something. I tell you what we'll do. I will show you us trying to get single user mode. Do you want me to try the attack again? Do you want me to try and boot into single user mode directly again? Yes, you'll believe me? Okay, so why don't I show you what happens if you do this. What we can do, okay, what you can do to stop this this Open Apple S thing. If you look in Apple's documentation, if you look in the etc.tty's file, what it says is you can change the etc.tty's file. You can put insecure console, and it will not do this. So I've tested that, and that's wrong. If you put insecure on the console line instead of secure, it still boots to single user mode. It doesn't do this. It boots to single user mode, no password required or anything like that. So what happened was some guy wrote a program. It's up on osxscripts.com, secure it. He wrote a little program. It's a little Perl program. It's a shell script that installs a Perl program. And what this program does is basically you set a boot password. You set, it's not a it's not a bootloader password. You're setting a separate password. It's not the bootloader password, it's not the root password. You're welcome to use either one if you want. And that password is, the system makes you give it that password every time you try to boot into single user mode. And the way it works is his script just inserts that little language right there into rc.boot. And it says, if the boot type is single user mode, then run password.pl. Okay, and if you try to break out of password.pl, it reboots the system. So let's do that on this system here. Okay. So I've unpacked that secure it tarball already. And it's really pretty simple. You just run install, and it says, give me the password you want to use to protect single user mode. Okay? This, as you can see, is kind of a kludge. Okay? What we'd like is for Apple's recommended method to just work properly. It doesn't. We'll complain to Apple later on. For now, we'll set a password, and it says that it's gone and adjusted rc.boot, and we can look at rc.boot, and we can see, where is it? Okay, right toward the end of rc.boot, what we get is, do you want me to try to increase this font? Yeah. Can you read it in the back? No, no way. How's that? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. So what that is we've just, that's that little language. It just added a little to rc.boot. And rc.boot is the script that gives you root if you're going to single user mode. This script gets run, and if you're going into single user mode, this is the one that gives you root. So what he's done is just changed it so that if we reboot the system, and this time I'll use shutdown. Here, I'll show you. Okay, it's been password.pl. It's actually basically really, really simple. Okay, it's got a data file in user local secure it data, and that data file is just your password. It's been crypted. It's using standard Perl crypt command, which is just the normal libcrypt library. Okay. So it's basically the same encryption you're used to on old school Unix passwords. You could probably MD5 it. If you wanted to, you could probably change this script to MD5. If more than 3 people from this room email me and ask me to, I'll re-release it with an MD5, as long as the license on secure it doesn't prevent me from doing so. And I don't think it does. I think it's just something that was given away for free. Okay? But all it's doing, it's extremely simple. All it's doing is going in and having you enter a password, crypting that password, seeing if the crypted one is the same as the other one, and not letting you out. Yes, in the back. Does the rc boot script prevent you from getting out of the script before you get to this point? If I remember correctly, yes. We're going to look at the rc.boot script. Okay. So it's setting signals as undefined. If you can find a way, kill, quit, start, stop. Where's it? Let's see. What's that? Yeah, there's not a trap. I haven't seen this before, but I'm assuming that that's handling each of these signals. Right. Okay. So if you could find another way in. Okay. Let's reboot now. I'm also going to show you how you can stop somebody from booting from a CD. Do you guys want me to demo that? I mean, you see that there's a delay in here. Do you want me to demo that, or do you want me to just tell you how it works? Tell us. Anybody for demo? Okay, we'll stick with the tell us then. I've unplugged the laptop from the projector just in case it's the reason we weren't getting single user mode was because it was getting upset about the projector being its display. Does all of this, I haven't tried on Open Darwin, and I'll tell you, I've only got one machine. But I would be happy to, if somebody's got an Open Darwin machine that, I mean, in terms of the booting, I can't test that remotely. But if anyone's got an Open Darwin machine they want to give me some access to look around on, I'd be happy to look around on it. Okay, I don't know why, but I'm not actually getting single user mode no matter what I do with the projector. So I'm going to stick to the tell you rather than show you on this example as well. Okay. When we're done with that previous step, single user mode is password protected. It's password protected through a kludge, but it's password protected. Okay. That would make me happy enough to not worry about that attack at DEF CON. Okay. So what else can you do? Somebody actually came up with another method, right? You could actually go and replace your kernel. You could actually go and replace your kernel with one that just didn't run rc.boot. Okay, one that didn't really believe in single user mode. I don't like this idea, but I've added a slide on it. And the reason I don't like it is I think during your first hardware failure, when you really wanted single user mode, you don't have it around. That would make me pretty unhappy. Okay, as a sysadmin, I really wouldn't want that. As somebody with a laptop, I still wouldn't want it I still wouldn't want it that much. Okay? So what's the other thing that's going to happen to me at DEF CON when I put this laptop down, but chain it up so that someone's not going to just outright steal it, but, well, let's assume that the script kiddies aren't going to screwdriver it open. They need a hex wrench, I think. But, what's the other thing they're going to do? Well, probably one of them is going to walk up with an Apple boot CD. Okay? And I've got one with me. And the nice thing about that Apple boot CD is you don't have to just use it. You don't even have to know that much to use it. Okay, normally what? If you've got a system, you forget the root password on it, or it's somebody else's. You take a boot CD, you put it in, it boots up. You get boot off that CD. You have to go and remount the drive's read-write, go and edit the file from the drive, sync the drive, shut the machine down, bring it back up. Okay, Apple actually thought, people are going to forget their passwords often enough. If you boot off the Apple install CD, okay, it's got one of the options across the top. I don't remember exactly which of the three menus, but one of the options across the top is the password utility, which is really nice. It says, hi, which drive that's attached do you want to change the password on? And you can click on any drive that's attached, including the main hard drive. And so then it says, which account would you like to change the password for? And you can change it for any of the accounts, for the administrator account, for your account, for root account, etc. Okay. So this is a very useful utility in the hands of DEF CON script kiddies, and the rest of us too. Okay, so to boot from CD, and I promised this would work, okay? All you do is you put the CD in, you hold down the Option key while you're booting, and what happens is it presents a list of devices you can boot from. You can boot from an iPod, actually. You can boot from the Apple iPod, I've been told. I don't have one, but if anybody wants to give me one for testing purposes, I'd be happy to accept. But you know, you can also, so you can use that to boot from CD, and you can boot from CD, and once you boot from CD, you can use the password utility, or you can, you know, mount that if you've got a nice bootable CD for OS X, you can launch whatever little operating system you want off that CD and do whatever you want to the drives. Okay, so if you don't want that to work, your countermeasure is, and people who admin Solaris systems especially should kind of recognize this, they've got Apple's using the open firmware. So what you do is you boot into open firmware, Command, Option, OF, and once it boots up, you'll get a little, you're going to be in text mode, you get a little text prompt that says, that just lets you type whatever, and you can type password, and it'll ask you to enter a password, okay? And then you can type set env security mode command. Don't put security mode equals command. If you do, it won't work. It won't hose this. You'll just be setting a variable that's not really defined, okay? So security mode command, and then type reset all. What that does is makes it so that people can boot normally. But if they want to boot from another device, if they want to change the boot process in any way, they've got to type in a password, okay? You can actually set it to full, and then they have to type, then they have to type your open firmware password for any boot. I actually do that to a number of my laptops, but that may not be what you want for, you know, a machine that's supposed to just work. Okay, that you just don't want somebody countermanding the boot process. Okay, so I generally recommend command. You can set it to full, and then it won't boot otherwise. Okay, is there anybody in this room who's got a Sunbox? They've gone and forgotten the root password and forgotten the EEPROM password, and they've had this set to full? Anyone? Okay, well then I'll embarrass myself and say that I've done it. Okay, if you do this, you go on Google and you say, you know, forgot password to EEPROM or whatever. What you'll come back with is that the primary solution for this, there are better ones, but the primary solution people keep recommending is, well, if you've forgotten the password on your EEPROM and you had it set to full, your machine's not going to boot unless you can basically go on eBay and buy a new EEPROM and replace it. It's not something that's just simply battery backed. You can't just yank the battery like on good old Intel hardware. You're just kind of stuck with an unbootable system. Okay, that's another reason to just go for command and just stick to, I just need to, you know, I'm just trying to make sure someone doesn't countermand the boot process. Okay, so what else? If I boot my system the way it ships from Apple, when you first buy an Apple machine, okay, it says, you know, you start it up and it asks you for a user. It asks you for a first username, asks you for a name and password. And it's saying, I'll go and set this as the first user on the box. And so great, you set that as the first user on the box. From now on, Apple's default is that the machine always comes up as that user. Okay, it always comes up as that user whenever whenever you turn the machine on. So you turn the machine on, no authentication required. This is, again, a very, very friendly little thing, but not what I really want the machine doing, you know, if I leave it alone at DEF CON, because, you know, I might have the screen locker on right now, but somebody can somebody just turn the machine off and bring it back on, and it logs directly in as me, and they're like, ha ha ha, and, you know, copying all my files off to their FireWire drive. I don't like that. So you can change that in two different ways. The way that's nice and easy and fits on the GUI just involves bringing up System Preferences. Oh, it's still blue screen? Let's try this again. I'm sorry? He hates to use the phrase Mac and blue screen at the same time. Okay. So we go under System Preferences. We go under Accounts. Okay. Login Options. Oh, wait. Where'd I put that? Here. Login automatically. It's under Users. Login automatically. You just unclick that box, and that's gone. There's also a way to do that in text mode. by editing a file, but I won't show you that unless you ask me to. This should be, you can edit that file by hand, and what that file looks like is XML. Let's pump up that font here. A lot of the files that I'm expecting to be in etc are in places like library or system library. Okay, com, apple, login window, plist. Plist stands for property list. It's an XML file. There are a lot of Apple's configuration files are XML files, and you can edit these files with the, you can edit these files usually with the defaults command. Oh, I already turned it off. Okay, if we hadn't turned it off, what you'd see is, see that we have all these key value pairs. You've got key, retries until hint, integer 3, that's the value, key, value, key, value. So there'd be a key for auto login user, and it would say auto login user J. So you could just delete that entirely. Okay, you should be able to use the defaults command to change these files. And that's really what was supposed to be your interface to these files, where you're allowed to adjust them. But it's not actually, but it doesn't actually work here. Okay? So I've just been editing this by hand. What else as far as boot security? The login screen gives you the ability before you've authenticated, before you've logged in, to reboot the machine or shut it down cleanly. That, again, is a really nice little feature. It's not quite as useful at DEF CON. But it's still something that I'd prefer not to have people be able to do. Okay, so we can change that in that system preferences window that I had up. Okay, in accounts, login options, and then we've got hide the restart and shutdown buttons. Okay. And that'll make sure that's turned off. The other place you can change it is in the etc.tty's file on that console line. And that thank you. Okay, so etc.tty's. Okay, I told you about the etc.tty's file. It has that console line. And we go to the console line. And what you can do is just on that line as an option, you can add, okay, right there, power, off, out. Okay, you can add the line minus power, off, disabled, capital YES. And that prevents that. Now, you'll notice on that console line it says secure. Okay, it said insecure is Apple's default. What that should be doing for us is stopping us from logging in directly, stopping us from using single user mode. That's not, to my knowledge, what's causing this problem right here, where OpenAppleS wasn't working. Because I tried that, got very frustrated, said, okay, I'll look for another method. Okay, so either of those two methods have the same effect in the act. Okay, you can't restart or power off the machine without authenticating first. And that's kind of nice. Okay, so at this point, those are my boot security issues. Okay, those are the issues I have in terms of boot security. That's how I'd fix them. You can potentially think of more ways to countermand the boot process. I like the idea of checking scripts and seeing if I can Control-C anywhere in the boot process whatsoever. That's a good idea. Stop doing that. Okay. So from here, what I'd like to do is basically show you what demons are running on the system and how we can shut them off if we want to. It's not as easy as you'd expect because Apple didn't quite intend for you to do as much in terms of turning things off. One of the interesting things, has anybody heard of Rendezvous? You heard of Rendezvous? Okay, about a quarter of the room. Rendezvous is this nice little system, you know, you can use it. Rendezvous will, yeah, there's somebody in the third row that went like this. Okay. Rendezvous is this nice little system that, hey, would you like me to find other people on your local area network that are using instant messenger too, and then you can add them to your buddy list? Do you want me to find people on the network who want to share files and so on and so on? So, you know that you're just riding the subway with your laptop on, and you forgot to turn off the wireless card, and all of a sudden it's saying, you know, it's going and advertising to everybody, hey, Jay's got some files to share, here you go, and he's on Instant Messenger, maybe you should talk to him, and all of a sudden you're being spammed by the sales guy sitting across from you. Hey, maybe you want to buy some security software. I got firewalls, you know, and somebody else is going and copying all of your MP3s. You know, it's okay, I don't really like the idea of Rendezvous too much. I mean, I'm sure it's extremely convenient, but I'm at a security conference, man. I'm not going to run that stuff on my laptop while I'm here. I'm not going to run it anytime, but I'm sure as heck not going to run it here. So Apple didn't actually give you an easy way to shut it off, and that's what we're going to see. We're going to see there are a few things that they decided that you wouldn't really want to shut off. So they didn't really give you any easy interface for doing it. Okay, so to show you how to audit the boot process, basically, we talked about these earlier. /etcrc is what's actually, you know, is kind of our init with starting up etcrc, and RC is kind of doing the bulk of our work for getting all the programs running that we're used to. Okay, what you need to know about etcrc is that it runs rc.common to do some common startup functions, and importantly to us, it sources a file called etc/hostconfig. Okay, and etc/hostconfig looks like this. Okay, etc/hostconfig looks like this, and it has a bunch of things that you might want turned on or off or configured in some way. And so that's kind of that's supposed to be our master file to shut everything on and to shut everything off and turn it back on if we want to. Okay, Apple actually comes with some decent defaults compared to a lot of other operating systems. I didn't expect OS X to come out to be quite so good, actually. You know, in terms of not starting up with a running web server. You know, it doesn't. The web server's off by default, okay? And we can see that if we look for if we look for web server. And it's right, yeah, it was on the first screen. I just wanted to highlight it. Okay. So web server's set to no by default. There's a bunch of programs in here. We'll take a look at this file because we'll be shutting things down. Okay. Now, etcrc is going to source that file. Okay, and then what? It's going to run, as the last thing that runs in etcrc, it runs System Starter. Okay, System Starter is kind of Apple's answer to, you know, to both the BSD and sys5 boot systems we're kind of used to. Okay, so System Starter, what it does is it runs through, feels kind of sys5 here. Okay, it felt kind of BSD over there. You know, that these things turn on and off based on that. On the other hand, it's kind of sys5. What you've got is you've got these directories. All of Apple's stuff is in /system/library/startup items. Startup items is a really special directory. And there'll be a bunch of subdirectories we'll see called foo. And those subdirectories will have scripts in them, also called foo. Whatever the directory is called, the subdirectory is going to be called. And what System Starter does is it looks in all of those directories, at all those different directories, looks for their script, looks in all the foos, looks for all the scripts called foo. So it looks in directory foo, finds a script called foo, looks in directory bar, finds a script called bar, and so on and so on. And it looks at all those and it's going to run them all. Okay, it's going to run them all with start. It's going to run, foo start. And what's weird is the order in which it runs them is actually dynamic. Okay, the order in which it runs them is actually dynamic. Let me show you. What you've got is we look at system, library, startup items. Oh, I also mentioned another directory, /library/startup items. That's where you're supposed to put the scripts that you want to have started. Okay. So if we look at system library startup items, here, let's put that near the top of the screen. Okay. If you look there, you have a bunch of scripts, and we see the one called, let's look at Apache. There's a bunch of directories. Okay. So if we look at Apache, that's a directory, and we can look at inside that directory, and there are 3 files. Okay. The 3 files are a script also called Apache. That's the start script. It's also the stop script. Resources, that's a directory. It's got a bunch of internationalization information and all that. We're not interested in that right now. And then startup parameters. And what startup parameters it has in it, oh, I should be in the Apache directory to show you that. Let's look at that. Startup parameters.plist, okay, property list. So we've got, can you all see that? Or should you want me to put it at the top? Top. Top it is. Okay, so we have a description. It says Apache web server. We've got provides, web server that provides us so that anything that depends on it knows that this provides that. Provides web server requires directory services to already be in place. Okay, uses disks, NFS, network time, but doesn't require them. It's just kind of, you know, if you're already, what these are telling, and then it says order preference none. Okay, what these are telling System Starter is, you need to make sure that you run me before anything that requires web server. You need to run me after directory services. And if you happen to know that you're going to be running disks, NFS, or network time, you might run me after them. Okay, and then that order preference. Order preference can be first, it can be last, it can be none, it can be early, it can be late. And what you're saying, what it's saying is, I need to be the first thing run on the system. System Starter will just take this as a recommendation. Or something says, I need to be the last thing that runs on the system, or so on. So System Starter is kind of dynamically choosing the order in which it runs things. That's a weird little, you know, it's a weird little thing, but okay. It's, yes?
In terms of when you're watching the app to boot up, at what point is System Starter kicking off? Is that the dialog that comes up, or kicking off in starting services?
So the question is, at what point do I see that? At what point in the Apple boot is System Starter actually kicking off? Is that you know, we saw there was an Apple and this whir, and then we saw, you know, then we got a new logo and it says starting this, you know, starting this, etc. It would be at that point, the point where you're seeing the startings, or before. I don't know whether it's before. I don't know whether the logo is something that System Starter actually starts. I suspect that it is. Okay. Okay. So we just took a look at our script, system library startup items. Apache was our script, and we've got meta information inside Apache startup parameters.plist. Okay. So our script, you can think of foo as Apache. Apache takes the argument start, stop, and restart. Okay, and this is actually how we're supposed to start and stop these things. Okay, so you can also use System Starter itself on the command line to start and stop these. You can run System Starter stop, start, or restart, and then the name of that directory. Okay, you can give it, you know, you can give it Apache. You don't have to give it web server. You give it Apache. Okay. We talked about the ordering in terms of order preference. Okay. Now, those, yes, in the front.
When you use System Starter, is there a principal order for system services versus user-defined services, like an Apache and
Is there a, does System Starter have a preference for the, if I have, say, 2 Apache scripts, does it care about the one that came with the system in system libraries versus the one that I've added in library startup items? I don't know. I suspect not. Nothing that I was able to find in Apple's documentation of System Starter demonstrated that. I would suspect that if it has one behavior now, it might have a completely different behavior later on. OS X is still kind of changing shape right now, so I wouldn't depend on that behavior because Apple hasn't documented which they're going to do, and their operating system is definitely still in flux. Okay, so we know that etc.rc start system starter. System starter runs these scripts. Okay, each of the system starter scripts is also sourcing etc host config, and so etc host config becomes the way that we turn off most of these items. Okay. So if we take a look at any of them, if we take a look, this is one I wanted to see. I keep expecting everything to be in etc. System, library, startup items, NFS, NFS, and we look at that. If we look at this script, we see kind of like you expect. There's a start service. The start service will have a stop service. Okay. The script starts out by sourcing rc.common, which will do a few things, and then source host config, which is the reason they're all sourcing rc.common, is that they get host config in there. Okay. And then what's it do? It goes and makes sure the network is up. That's kind of what you'd expect out of an NFS script. It prints a message to console. And then the first thing it does is it runs nfsiod. nfsiod, we'll talk about. nfsiod is an NFS client daemon on OS X for doing asynchronous NFS requests. It started whether we liked it or not, whether we wanted an NFS started or not. Okay? So as we look down this file, what else happens? It's going and reading exports, okay? It's going and reading exports and seeing if this actually is an NFS server. That's kind of smart. And if it is an NFS server, it actually starts up NFS daemons, an NFS server daemon. And then finally, the first time it actually asks us for something, it's asking us if auto mount is on. That auto mount variable is what was set in etc host config. So if etc host config is auto mount set to yes, then it'll run the auto mount daemon. It's NFS auto mount daemon, okay, that mounts NFS volumes dynamically and unmounts them when they've been idle. Okay, so the nice thing about the script is it's only starting up NFSD. It's only starting up NFSD and mountd if you actually got shares you're exporting, if you're actually exporting. Okay, and the way it's doing that is it's checking both etc exports and then it's also checking netinfo. Okay, netinfo, to my knowledge, is this little next thing. Netinfo smells to me kind of like NIS. Okay, who's familiar with NIS? Okay, anybody unfamiliar with NIS? Okay, well, so netinfo kind of smells like NIS, and what it is that on these systems, when you go and change users, you don't actually change. You're not. Well, when you're going and administering the system, you administer the system very much the way Apple wants us to do it, is to do it through netinfo, through different netinfo commands. So there's nidump is one of them. Nidump goes and queries the netinfo database for all the users. We can run netinfo password. It would give us a list of all the users. It would give us our normal in normal password file format, complete with passwords. So, so much for shadowing. You can run nidump exports, and that'll give you a list of exported file systems. Now, if you want to change that, you change these things with also with netinfo commands. Okay, this is kind of strange. Okay, this is kind of strange, but so you kind of have to, if you want to make sure the machine doesn't actually have NFS exports, you've actually kind of got to check both the etc file you were looking at and netinfo. In the early editions of OS X, okay, everything was controlled through netinfo, and the etc files were just kind of placeholders. In new versions of NFS, netinfo is going and populating the information. As you adjust it with netinfo, it will go and populate it into etc files, and if you change an etc file, it'll get sucked up by netinfo. This is in recent releases. Okay, it's a strange thing. Anyway, if you want to turn off NFS, we know that all you got to do to turn off the NFS server is actually to go and make sure you don't have exports on the system. Okay. The other thing is, though, that we started up, as I pointed out, it starts up the nfsiod, an NFS client daemon, whether you like it or not. And the tough thing is, if you end up having a vulnerability in that daemon later on, you're going to really kind of wish that it wasn't running by default, especially if you weren't using your system as an NFS client. The only thing you can do for that is actually to edit the NFS script. Okay. To really go through and do a complete audit, what you basically should do is go and stop and read all the scripts that are on the system and, take a look and say, okay, what's that starting? What's that starting? What's that starting? And read through all the scripts and understand what they do. Okay? For the time challenged, we can kind of go in reverse. And what we do is we can go and take a look at the system, look at the programs that are running on the system, and go and find out how they started and deactivate them. And that's, what I do from an audit perspective. I just try to figure out. Okay? So the first thing that you want to do before, just to make that easier, is to go through hostconfig. That was that file we were looking at earlier. And actually go and just shut off anything you don't want ahead of time. Okay? So you can go through here and look at what says no or yes on it. So if we look at this, the very first thing that says yes on it is auto mount. Okay? So we can turn off auto mount. This is especially important if we know we're not going to be an NFS client, because what auto mount's doing on this system is just going and mounting NFS volumes that we may be, that we may have use of. If we go and try to, the way auto mount works is if you're auto mounting, if you get your home directories by NFS, then when a user first comes on and they need their home directory mounted, they type mount, they try to access their home directory. They're not typing mount, I'm sorry. They try to access their home directory, and auto mount will go and mount it for them. And then, so there's a few second delay, and then it tries to, and then they do whatever they're going to do. If they log out, if they stop, if they log out, if they stop accessing whatever directory is being auto mounted, then the auto mounter will put it away. I'm sorry. We can also, so you can change auto mounts on, we can turn that to off, just as a matter of editing the file. Okay. In terms of once you've changed something from off to on, from on to off, you can either do one of two things. You can just reboot, or you can track down what script was actually running that, and you can restart the script. And so if we're going to do that, what we'd run would be here. I'll clear this so that it's at the top of the screen. Okay. Okay, we knew that it was in the system library startup items, okay, and I'll run NFS restart. And I should find that that auto mount daemon is now missing. Okay, it was there before. I guess we didn't really check for it. What else might we do? Okay, you saw in the host config file that I've got up on the slide, we've got cups on. Okay, so let's see if we can find our cups D. Okay, so the question was, is that required for printing, is cups required for printing to a USB printer on the machine? Okay, right, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going and turning something off just automatically. So as we're looking through this file, we kind of want to take a look at what the variables are referencing and decide whether we need those things or not. Okay, so auto mount was the auto mounter. We kind of I made a quick decision on this, knowing that my laptop doesn't mount NFS volumes, and I want it off. Okay, I also look at cups and I say cups is the printing daemon that's on OS X by default. I've also had it on Mandrake systems. I think I've had it on Red Hat systems. And so I want to turn off, if I want to, if I've got a USB printer attached, I'll need to keep cups, right? If I need a print daemon on this system for any reason, I'll need to keep cups. Okay, if I don't, and again, this laptop is nicely my little traveling laptop, so it's very easy for me to just turn things off. I'll go and change cups to no, and I'll go and look at the start script that started it, and the start script for cups is printing services, and I'll run printing services stop. And find that it wasn't there. If I were to run start, let's just make sure that we turn something off. We saw in our previous process list there was user sbin cups, cups D, and we can stop it again like this. If we want to make sure, so if we change host config, we should just be able to stop the script and then restart it and see that nothing happens. See that we don't actually end up with cups D. Okay. What else? Did I have another? Okay. The only other thing that's yes or no here is netinfo server automatic. Okay, we've got a slide on that. Just take a look at the rest. RPC server, that's port map or RPC bind, that's automatic. Time sync set to yes. Okay, so we turned off auto mount, and just now, I'm sorry, I've been getting ahead of my slides slightly. Okay. Just now we looked at cups. We looked at the printing services script. We decided if we wanted to turn that off or not. We could change it at hostconfig and make sure that it doesn't run. Okay. The next variable that we had was netinfo server. Let me bring up that hostconfig on this machine. Bring it to the top. Okay. You see netinfo server is set to automatic. Okay. And what netinfo server is there for is that's our netinfo. Okay. It's either, when it's set to automatic, the deal is that it can either go and try to query netinfo servers on the network, or it can go and query the one that's on the box. If you turn the one that's on the box off, you can't log in anymore. Okay. So you don't want to set this to no. You can just leave it as automatic, or you could set it to whatever gives you local. Okay. What netinfo server is doing, if we read the script, is that netinfo server is running nibind, and it's running netinfod. And what nibindD does is it actually goes and starts netinfod's as needed. Okay. It goes and you'll see multiple ones of them on the system. So we want to leave it to automatic. We want to leave it set to automatic to make sure that we get. We want to leave it to automatic to make sure that we get netinfo information, because if we don't have it, we can't log in, and that's really kind of, makes our system a little less useful. Okay. What were the other variables that we had set to yes or no or automatic? We had time sync. This here seems to be set to no on my original default install. I rebuilt the system I rebuilt the system last night so that we'd have a default install. My original default install, time sync was on. And what time sync does is controls whether the system is synced with NTPD. Okay, it's a useful thing to keep around. This is one of those things. That lots of us have tons of use for. You'd like your system. One example is if your system gets hacked, or if it gets attacked even. But if it's getting hacked, what you really like to have is this nice little audit trail of times. You'd like to know that at this given time, you had a packet go through the firewall, but get flagged as something that got logged. At the same time, so many fractions of a second later, you had the packet get seen by your IDS, and then hit the box where it caused an event. And if you've got that audit trail, it's a whole lot easier to track what's going on and convince someone else that you've been hacked by this coming from there, etc. Okay, so time sync is one of those things that you might turn off, and I would choose to when I'm at DEF CON, because that way I don't have to worry about whether somebody on the local network has an exploit against NTPD. I might turn it back on when I leave DEF CON, or I might leave it off. Okay. Once you've gone through and turn those things off, we can do that. Okay. We turned off cups. We ran printing services stop and printing services start. And time sync is already off, so I won't have that demon. Oh, am I leaving IPv6 on purpose? That's a good question. Okay, if I'm not using IPv6, and I sure as heck don't expect to be anytime soon, we should be turning that off as well. Okay. So at that point, what are we going to do? At the point where we've gone through hostconfig and we've run the stop scripts or we've rebooted, what we'll do at that point is we're going to run PS and get a list of the remaining processes on the system. And to make this list more readable, I might run PS and grep and grepj out, so that I'm left only with the processes that are running. I'm left only with the processes that aren't really me. Okay, and I can look at these. Okay, and I see a bunch. I see a bunch in here. One of the interesting things to me, let me see if this is on this page or the next. Right. On this page is this process 303, inetd, middle of the page. Inetd is running on this system? Why is inetd running on this system? Okay. So you know, one of the first things I'll do is I'll say, okay, well, inetd is running. I better go and turn whatever's running off. So I look at Apple's inetd.conf, and it turns out that every single line in inetd.conf is commented out. Okay, they're all commented out. So inetd is not actually running anything. It's just running on the system, listening to no ports, just kind of taking up runtime. Okay, so if I look for where inetd is running out of, by the way, you may say, Jay, you said you're not reading through all the scripts. How are you finding out where inetd is running out of? I'm just kind of grepping inetd ***, and I get a list, and I get that the directory this is running out of, the script this is running out of, is the IP services / IP services file. So if I look at that file, IP services, what do I see? I see right here that the system runs inetd and inetd, and xinetd. Okay, so there's inetd. I've got this on the slide as well. Okay, so it's actually running both. And you can run both together. You can run inetd and xinetd on the same system. And I remember when I first read that a few years ago and thought, that's really strange. As long as they're not binding to the same ports, you can do that. You could have inetd listening to the telnet port and xinetd listening to the FTP port. And as long as they don't have any crossover in ports, it's fine. Apple ships both of them on the system. They used to use inetd. They moved to xinetd. Okay? The weird thing is that while xinetd exits gracefully when it doesn't have any ports to listen to, inetd just kind of sticks around. Okay? So if we want to, we could modify this script. Okay? If we want to, we can modify this script so that inetd doesn't actually run if there's nothing for it to do. Okay? And I've just got a little egrep command that's useful for that. And what that does is greps the inetd file for any lines that aren't commented. This is kind of, you know, simple enough. It doesn't do a whole lot. And if there's any lines that are not commented out, then we run inetd. And that's assuming that I don't have any blank lines. So if I want to, I can make that egrep a little bit more comprehensive. I could even do some things. I could even do some things with setIROC and try to really chop up and make sure that I've actually got something with enough columns too. Okay, but let me just give you something simple. Okay, you also might just comment out inetd out of this file. I mean, that's really what I would do, you know, for my own machines. Just comment it out, and if somebody goes and changes inetd.conf and expects it to figure out what to do, well, they should know to go and find inetd and start it themselves and find the script that it runs out of. Okay. I can do that. By the way, inetd and xinetd, the way you audit inetd.conf is you just go and look for any lines that aren't commented out. In xinetd, you just look for any, what you've got with xinetd is it's a directory, etc xinetd.d, and each service that would normally be listed in inetd.conf on its own line, in xinetd gets its own file. So you look in the file and you see if everyone has, first line up there, disable equals yes. If it doesn't have disable equals yes, then that port's going to be open. Okay? If it has disable equals no, or it doesn't have a disable line at all, that's a port that's not going to be open. Okay? It turns out that if we look at this box, which keeps trying to save us some battery power, if we look at the system, we're going to find that everything in xinetd and inetd is disabled already. That's really coming a long way. Okay? The fact that they're this early in their operating system's development, they're kind of doing things quite so right, where the box starts up with nothing in inetd, nothing in xinetd. It took Red Hat how many years to figure that out? So, you know, the fact that they're getting this right, and Red Hat still has one thing. Listen, it listens on localhost, but they run SGI FAM by default. This little thing that listens on the local network and watches for file changes and reports them to whatever wants to hear about them. Okay, so this is kind of cool. They've done a good job here. Okay. How often does Apple update their scripts? They've got an auto update process. I don't know if their auto update, if their patches are going to stomp on our changes. What you'd really do if you want to make these changes over and over is what you do probably on any system. I mean, what I think you do on any system, which is either find the vendor-supported way to do it, and as I've shown you, there are some things that aren't vendor-supported yet. And the other one would be to automate the process. You can either use somebody else's automation, you can write your own. Yes, in the back. Yeah. So INetD is now out. They probably, I don't know. So Apple's definitely, I mean, I told you when we started, Apple's operating system is in flux. That's good. It means they're improving things still. So I'm not busting on Apple here. I know I may sound like it. I just bust on every vendor because I'm a lockdown person and the systems don't come massively locked down out of the box. I get to bust. I mean, that's basically what I do. That's fine. Okay. What programs do you have left? If we do that PS listing and you look at the root programs on the box, you've got something called core services. That has to be left in place. You've got auto disk mount. Okay, what does auto disk mount do? Well, if you take your laptop and you plug in a FireWire drive, or if you take your laptop and you put a CD-ROM or a DVD in the drive or whatever, you can either mount those in one of two ways. You can go and type your own mount command, the way I'm kind of used to on the Linux world, or you can use auto disk mount, which is running by default, and auto disk mount will go and mount whatever devices you connect to it automatically and say, here you go. In my opinion, whether or not you use this depends on how the system's used. If this is, if this is a system that's sitting in a data center, I understand my laptop's not sitting in a data center, but they do have OS X servers. If this is a system that's sitting in a data center and nobody besides the sysadmins, the admin should be able to mount drives, then we turn this off. Okay. If we're at DEF CON, we might turn it off. If you're security paranoid, you might turn off disk mount, auto disk mount, and go and mount all the devices yourself as you plug them in. That's what I'll be doing. Whether you choose to or not kind of depends again on this risk issue. How risky is your environment, et cetera, and are you worried? Okay. What other programs are running? SBIN init. Init is good. We're used to init. Init starts everything. Mock init is also good because mock init started init. Init's not really supposed to have a supposed to have a parent process, okay, because it's supposed to be the granddaddy of all the other processes on the system. But I told you, mock's a little strange. So mock init starts init. We'll leave that there. Crash Reporter D. Crash Reporter D basically handles crashing programs. It's basically providing core dumps. Okay, I'm leaving it on because I don't know what the effect is of turning it off just yet. Okay, Blue D. Blue D, it's an interesting daemon because Blue D provides boot Bluetooth. Now, the system I ran this PS command on doesn't have Bluetooth turned on. It's got Bluetooth, but it doesn't have it turned on. I turned it off. The daemon still sticks around. Okay, you can either track down where the daemon started from and comment it out so it doesn't run, or you can just trust that it's going to stay off when it's supposed to stay off. Your call. Okay. Lookup D, config D. These are both necessary parts for netinfo. But lookup D is part of netinfo. Config D is used. Config D is part of having this system. Config D, among other things, does DHCP. Okay. We want that to stick around. Cron runs automated processes from time, at specific times, generally periodic. Okay. We'll generally leave that running. I turn it off on some systems, sometimes on laptops. But there may be important things in there. So what you do before you turn it off is look at the cron jobs and decide whether you want to turn it off or not, whether you're prepared to go without those or to run them manually or what have you. I don't normally think of, cron did have weaknesses back, a while back, but I don't really worry about them now. Doesn't seem to have weaknesses now. If this is a personal system, you're not really worried about other users. If you've got other users on the box, you might disallow them from using cron. Okay, but in terms of turning off cron, that's generally a bad idea for your system. Okay, dynamic pager. Dynamic pager is important. You've got to keep that around. You've got to keep that around for swapping, for paging out processes. There's another process that also works with that, update. update a few items down. Okay? Update is used for flushing the file systems every 30 seconds so that the disks never get too far out of date with the state of the system. Okay? We need those. KXTD is used for loading external kernel modules on demand. We need to keep that. Okay. Netinfod, I talked about that. We've got to keep netinfod around. If we don't, we can't log in. If you're really paranoid, I guess, you could log into the box, kill netinfod, and then put it back before you logged out. But I think that'd be over the top. syslogd, we need syslogd. It's providing our logging. Okay. The big one for me is mDNS responder. What's mDNS responder sound like? Okay, it's multicast DNS responder. Okay, that sounded really useful to me. I was going to keep that until I went and found out what it was. So, a couple more slides, and we'll get to that. We talked about auto disk mount. That was the first thing that was in our list. We talked about when you want to turn those off, when you want to keep it. The other thing that auto disk mount is used for is if you download a disk image file. You ever download a disk image file on an OS X machine and all of a sudden it shows up as another drive? Well, that is what mounts them automatically. Whether you want to mount them automatically, again, it's one of those issues where it's your risk. You choose your risk. So we can turn that off. If we look at mDNS responder is the registration daemon for Rendezvous. It's what's sitting there and responding to requests and and telling the entire network, hey, I've got files to share. I've got somebody in Instant Messenger, and he's friendly. He wants to talk with you. Okay, so if you want to turn off Rendezvous, that was one of the weird ones I was telling you about. That's not in hostconfig. Okay, if you want to turn off mDNS responder, okay, what you have to do is go and find the script. Okay, the script is mDNS responder. Oh, sorry. Remember, those are directories. mDNS responder, mDNS responder, and find it. And basically, if you want to, what you could do is you could just write exit 0 there. Okay. If you didn't want to do that, you could go down and comment out the line that starts it. Okay. I'm more a fan of the first approach, but the second approach is also kind of more readable. So, to some, so your call. Rendezvous's gone now. Okay, we'll have to stop the script, and if we want to be safe, we should restart it too. So mDNS responder, stop, and if I run start, I better not find it here. Okay, I don't find it in my process list anymore. Here, I'll give you the process list with J grepped out. All fits on a page right now. It's kind of getting smaller. Okay, so mDNS responder I wanted gone. I'm putting up a website that kind of goes through all the rest of these that you might possibly want to turn off. At that point, when you're done going through and looking at running scripts, oh wait, there's auto disk mount, and I wanted that gone. So I remember I changed it. I guess I didn't run the stop script. Okay. When you're done going through and killing off scripts by looking at PS, what I would do then is run netstat minus ANP TCP and netstat ANP UDP. Okay, and what I want to do is look at what's still listening on the box. Okay, if I run my netstat and I grep for listens, just so I can just get listening ports. Okay, this is the wonderful power of doing PowerPoint slides. You can either choose fonts that are big enough, or you can choose to get everything on one line. So we've got netinfod's the first thing I see. Okay, I see on my list. I had when I was done auditing the reference system, I had 1033 as the only port that was listening on TCP. And if I looked at that, okay, what I can do is I can run, I gave you on the previous slide an lsof command. lsof is list open files. On Unix, everything's a file, including ports you're listening on. So if you want to know what's listening on a port, you can run lsof space -I for internet, space TCP or UDP colon the port number, and you get, hey, that's what this is. It's netinfod. Okay. Netinfod is okay. We saw it was only listening on loopback. It was just listening on 127.0.0.1. So it's, and from what I can tell, you can't run without netinfo. So it's not that dangerous because it's not listening on the global network interface. Okay. If we do our UDP audit, we find a bunch more ports that are still listening. Okay. 1033 in the middle, we're going to guess that's netinfo. We can check it. What we should do with each of these ports is check and see what they are. So if we run lsof on the first one, what do we get? Okay. We get lookup D. And what lookup D does is it's a daemon that's providing access, that's providing caching for netinfo information, for NIS information, for DNS information. And actually, really oddly, even the files in etc. Okay, it kind of caches their information if they weren't being brokered by netinfo itself. It's going and caching that information. As far as I can tell, you seem to need it on the system. Okay. 49227, we check the next port in our list. It turns out to be the same thing, lookup D, so we leave it alone. Okay. If we look at 1033, okay, that's netinfo D. That's only listening on loopback. We're not so worried about it. We'll leave that alone. Okay. Port 514 was that was something that really worried me. I ran lsof, and I got syslog D is sitting there listening on the syslog port. And I said, that's not good. Okay. However, I actually can't get this thing, when I was testing and trying to get rid of this, okay, if I look at the man page, what the man page says is under -u, let me see if the -u will stay up. No. If I look at the -u, it says, -u says, select the historical insecure mode in which syslog-d will accept input from the UDP port. Some software wants this, but you can be subjected to a variety of attacks over the network, including attackers remotely filling logs. So what did I do? As somebody who's responsible, I fired up my little logging client, and I started shooting remote logs at it. I couldn't get this thing to actually take any remote logs. And why can't it? Well, if I look at that syslog-d that's running, it's not running with -u. But what did the man page say? Okay. What the man page says, somewhere on here, it says -u is non-default. You have to specify -u to get this to listen on the network. So what I find is the man page tells me I have to run -u to listen on the network. So it's not running -u. It does seem to be listening on the network, but I can't get it to take any logs. I don't know. This is where, yes, in the back. Port 514, yeah. So it's part of the design. It's you know they're probably using the exact same syslog daemon. I can't actually turn it off, even though the program's not going to accept any network accept any input it's getting over the network. It's still listening to the network and still showing up in netstat. It's very odd, but I'm decided not to worry about it. Okay, what am I going to do though? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check it and try to fire off remote logging messages at it. Okay. Sorry, I skipped ahead. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check it. I'm going to read my man page. I'm going to check it. I'm going to say, okay, I can't get anything to it. What's the next thing I'm going to do? Okay. Actually, I was told I can give away a copy of the book. They gave me one copy to give away, and I said, okay, I'll think of a trivia question. Okay. What's the next thing I'm going to do? I've got the syslog daemon. It says that it's listening on the network. Netstat says that it is. Its man page says that it isn't. My tests show that it isn't. I'm not really that worried. What will I do? Somebody give me a nice, one more defensive measure. Oh, don't shout it out. I've only got one book. Somebody raised their hand. Okay, in the blue. I'll firewall it, right? I've got, this thing runs, OS X runs IP filter. I'll set up an IP filter based firewall. This one's yours, man. I'll run IP filter and I'll firewall off that port. Am I going to firewall off just that one port? Well, if I don't have time to construct a proper firewall, I'll just firewall off that one port. Oh, well, you just got it for free, man. Okay, so I could just firewall off that one port. If I've got more time on my hands, I'll make a complete firewall for the system. Now you say, well, then why don't you just, leave it alone for now and firewall it later? Well, my first answer to that is I don't want to leave anything alone for now and take my chances. What I'll do is I'll firewall off that one port immediately. And then I will at some point soon, maybe it'll be a week, but knowing me, it might be a month. It might be 3 months. I'll get around to writing a firewall for this one box, okay, or for my other OS X systems, okay? So let's keep looking at our ports. Port 68, I think this is our last one. UDP 68, that's our DHCP client, okay? If we set this up for static IP, no worries. If it's going to go DHCP, we'll need this to continue listening to the network, and so that's okay, okay? At this point, I'm finished. Our next steps would be to do a set UID audit and a set GID audit. Thank you. I got 10 minutes. I do a set UID audit, set GID audit, okay? And what I'm doing is I'm looking for programs, specifically I look for set UID root programs, set GID root programs. I'm looking for programs that every user on the system can run that gives them root privilege for any reason, okay? And I'm going to want to shut off some of those. I'm going to want to control access to some of those. And the reason for that is that one of them could end up being vulnerable at some point. It could end up having a vulnerability. Vulnerabilities in set UID programs tend to give any user on the system the ability to go from their normal user to executing commands, and usually a shell has root. So I'm going to look at the set UID programs that are on the box, and I'm going to take some of them and make them not set UID, and to say this program doesn't need to run as root. Okay. For the remaining, for the ones that do need to run as root, I might say, is there a set of users on this system that only needs, that doesn't need to run this? And the biggest thing that I'll do with OS X is what I'll say is, okay, I've got users on the system that run, say, the web server. I've got a user called Apache that the web server runs as. And then I've got a user J that the user runs as. So what I'll do is I'll take, say, the mount command, which is set UID, the ping command that's set UID, the traceroute command that's set UID. These are all commands that my web server doesn't need to run. Okay? It doesn't need to run those. And so I'll set the program, I'll take that program and I'll create a group for just my human users. I might call it humans, and I'll populate that group with just the human users, not the web server, not the DNS server, not the servers on the box. And I'll make those set UID programs. I'll make mount and ping and traceroute. I'll make those group owned by group humans, okay, and group executable, but not world executable. So that if somebody takes over my Apache server and they've got user Apache on the box, but they don't have root, they won't be able to run mount, they won't be able to run ping, they won't be able to run traceroute because they won't have execute access on them. And that's a nice little utility. That's a nice little process. By doing that, if it turns out, as has happened on Linux before, as has happened on lots of operating systems before, that there's a set UID mount command on there, and the mount command turns out to be vulnerable, turns out to have a vulnerability in it later on, if I've removed world execute, then someone who takes over the web server isn't able to escalate privilege to root through the mount command. So that's one of the first things I'll do on this system, okay? And I've got, if we end up with time, I'll show you a list of the set UID programs on the system. What else will I do? I will audit the cron jobs on the system, okay? What Mac OS X does is it runs a program called periodic. Runs a script, I believe it's a script. It's running periodic and tells periodic, and basically cron runs periodic, and periodic runs a bunch of other scripts. And those scripts are scripts that you want to run periodically, daily, weekly, monthly, okay? The ones that come on the ones that are on the system by default do things like compress the old logs, delete old files in temp, et cetera, okay? But I'm going to go and take a look at those cron jobs and make sure that none of them look dangerous. I'm going to make sure that they all have things I want to have run, and so on. I want to make sure that they're all useful. If none of them are useful, I'll turn off cron. I can't think of too many situations where I've turned off cron, but I could be persuaded. At that point, the other two things I do is I go and audit the daemon configurations. And by that we mean, if I do have a running web server on the system, if I did need the web server to be on, I would go and take some standard hardening steps and go and lock down the web server. Okay, I've got some articles on my website that's on a future slide. I'll show you one of the slides. And I've got some articles on how you might do that to different daemons that are on the system. The last thing I'd do is I'd do a general permissions audit. I would go and run around the system and I'd look for world writable files, world writable directories, and try to see if there are any, if those files and directories need to be world writable, and if there are any security implications of them being world writable. Okay. I'll show you what the effects are. For my set UID audit, okay, I didn't want to run through this. I just want to give you a process. For my set UID audit, this is just how I construct my lists of set UID files and set UID root files, and then I'll go and I'll look at those. For my cron jobs, I'll look at etc cron tab, and what I find is that all the cron jobs run as root, and they run periodic daily, periodic weekly, periodic monthly. Okay, and that program runs. What periodic daily does is it runs etc periodic daily. I'll show you here. Okay, if I look at, we're just looking at cron tab, at etc cron tab, and all it does is basically run periodic daily, weekly, and monthly. What periodic does is it goes through all the scripts that are in etc periodic, say, daily, and runs them. And what you see there is, here, I'll put this near the top of the screen. What you see there is that inside etc periodic daily, there are scripts that actually have a number in the beginning that's defining an order, 100 dot, what was that, the log cleaning? 100.clean logs and 500.daily, where 500.daily is okay. 500.daily is the main daily script. It's for everything else. It's for all the miscellaneous stuff. Okay, and the other thing it will do is run a script, if it exists, called etc daily.local, and that's where you're supposed to put your stuff for periodic to run. Okay, so I would go through, especially on a system that's already running, and check that file, and look at everything in etc periodic, and then check any files it references. And the only ones it references by default are those etc daily.local, etc weekly.local, and etc monthly.local. I take a look at those. Okay. So I had a slide referencing that. Okay. On daemon configurations, like I said, when you're in terms of locking down daemon configurations, you'd go and look at the daemons you're still running on the system and decide whether and once you've decided to keep them, you want to decide what their purpose is and then lock them down accordingly. Okay. On the permissions audit side, that last step, it's interesting what weak permissions can do. If you look at old Unix systems, if you get an old Solaris 251, Solaris 2.4 system, etc., you look at old Unix systems, they actually have all kinds of little weaknesses where you could look at a directory that was world writable, or a directory that was writable by some user other than root, some user that maybe things on the system were running as, and if you look at either directories that are world writable or writable by any user that you can get control of, they were often an easy way to jump up to root, because what you're able to do is to replace data files or programs that were in those directories. And if you could replace them, if an attacker could replace them, then they can often just start escalating privilege up. Okay. So in terms of a permission audit, you might want to go through on any systems you have, including especially any new operating systems, and look at what the permissions are. The very least that I tend to do is go and look for world writable files and world writable directories. Okay, it could be very dangerous if you had a system that had common applications that were run by root, or run by ordinary users, or run by administrators who are going to be who have more privilege on the system than you do, okay, than other users do, than the attacker would, okay, that are world writable. Because then, what do you do if you've got a world writable directory? What does an attacker do if, I don't know, if user bin is world writable? Does anybody want to? This is a such an oldie. What's that? Anybody? Yeah, replace login, replace copy, replace touch. Okay, you don't want to necessarily replace it. You might replace it with what? You might replace it with a wrapper script. You might move login aside to login.whatever, You might replace CP with, you might replace CP with your own CP, call the original CP cp.orig, and have your wrapper do something, and then call cp.orig. So really, permissions audit is definitely in order. It's definitely something you'd want to do on the system. Okay. Lastly, the last thing I'll tell you about is I told you Bastille's been ported. We ported Bastille. We started porting Bastille. It works now. We need to add more content to it, but I could definitely use help. Okay. If you are, if you play around with Perl some, and even if you are just marginally aware of Perl, Bastille's got a nice API that makes it very easy to add in new content, new tests, new fixes, without having to know much Perl at all, if any. And so we could definitely use some help on OS X. Okay. In terms of hardening, I've got articles on hardening up on my website. And this will, when I said you could lock down daemons, you'd have to go and read some stuff and learn how to lock down a given daemon. I do talks on that sometimes, and I have articles on my website telling you how to lock down specific daemons. So that's it. Any questions? I know we're out of time. Yes?
Real quick, what do you think of
Apple's
Apple's default IPFW rules?
default IPFW rules. I took a little bit of a look. They were okay, but honestly, I replaced them straight out with my own. But the fact that Apple's shipping with, I'll put it up on my website. It's a good idea. By the way, I'm going to do a book signing. They thought that'd be fun right at the beginning of lunch. Lunch is an hour and a half long, so if you've got a copy of the book, I'll be happy to sign it for you. If you want a copy of the book, they'll probably sell you one. I'll be right out there as soon as we leave here. So yeah, I'm going to post my IP filter rule set to my website, sure. Any other questions?
If you change the IP filter rules, I assume that you have to disable the nice GUI interface.
If I change my IP filter rules, I might have to disable the GUI interface for building them. Well, yeah, basically, if I don't want them clobbered if I ever decide to use the GUI interface. This is the thing with a lot of the GUI interfaces. What you do is you can either use the GUI interface to create them, or you can write your own. The GUI interface is, But yeah, I haven't even touched the GUI interface for creating rules. I just wrote my own by hand and placed it in there. Over there?
Have you looked at the server-based OS X?
I have not looked at the server-based OS yet. The question was, have I looked at the server-based OS X? I don't have one. Anybody got one? I'll be happy to audit it for you for free in exchange for getting to see it. Yes?
You said that you weren't sure that the update process changed things or not. It seems like we proved that to script everything just to avoid that possibility.
So the statement was, you said the update process might clobber things. On any operating system, the update process has some good chance of clobbering your hardening steps. So either, you've got two options there. Either one, you make sure that your hardening steps follow the vendor's particular interface for doing it, that their patches are never supposed to clobber. Recognize that if they have a bug, they'll still clobber it. Or item two was do what he said, which is just automate once you've decided on your hardening steps, automate them, create a script. That's nice both for consistency, for not having patches blow them away, and for scalability. You get another OS X box in, you just take your hardening script. Honestly, it's what I've done at every site that I've worked at. We've had, sometimes what we do is we'll have a hardening script that runs on every boot. So the system boots, the hardening script reruns and makes sure that everything that we hardened is still hardened, and changes anything that isn't, lets us know whether the new patches that are supposed to be installed, and then, brings up the rest of the system. There's another question over here somewhere. Did I already answer it? You're just stretching? Over there, yes. He's got a local script. He does exactly that. And that way he doesn't have to worry, because every so often he has had a patch clobber a hardening step. So we've all had it happen. Any other questions? Okay, I hope you had fun. I know the laptop was a little awkward, but cool.